Principles of Economics, my complete guide to understanding economics, is now available in hardcover, audiobook, and ebook from Saifedean.com, Amazon, and many more booksellers worldwide. And now I am also teaching a course based on this book on my website, Saifedean.com. Principles of Economics will run the whole academic year, from September to June, and will have a new lecture every 2 weeks, as well as weekly live online discussion seminars open to learners from all over the world and from all walks of life. Whether you're a student, a professional, or a retiree, you are making economic decisions every day, and this course will arm you with the wisdom of centuries of economists to improve your economic decision-making. You'll also get a free book of Principles of Economics if you sign up for the course, and if you do it before September 20th, you'll get a 20% discount. Go to Saifedean.com and sign up now. The Bitcoin Standard podcast is brought to you by Crowd Health. Crowd Health is the Bitcoiner's answer to fiat health insurance. If you listen to this show, you've probably heard me rail against the problems of modern healthcare and health insurance. Crowd Health is a brilliant new solution to this problem that leverages the power of Bitcoin to help people get affordable healthcare. Crowd Health holds its cash reserves in Bitcoin. It negotiates with healthcare providers on your behalf and gets you much better rates by offering to pay them cash, upfront, without having to go through the expensive bureaucracy of modern healthcare insurance. It's a solution that works better for healthcare providers and for patients by disintermediating large insurance companies who have the wrong incentives and are constantly raising costs. I'm very happy to have signed up for Crowd Health, and I'm really excited to support them as they disrupt the fiat health insurance industry. Go to joincrowdhealth.com and use the discount code SAIF, S-A-I-F, and you'll get the first 6 months for $99 only. Hello and welcome to the Bitcoin Standard podcast. Our guest today is Muaawiyah Tucker. Muawiya is an accomplished educator in Islamic law, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and blockchain technology. Since 2006, he has been teaching Arabic and Islamic studies, and later he expanded his expertise into computer, Bitcoin, blockchain, and cryptocurrencies with a focus on the Islamic perspective. Muawiya has produced a lot of videos and articles about his view on why Bitcoin concords with the Islamic perspective on money and Islamic Sharia. And I'm keen on getting his perspective on this topic, which I found very interesting and we've discussed repeatedly in this podcast. So, Muawiya, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, alhamdulillah. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for that.
So to begin with, first tell us a little bit about your background and how you found Bitcoin and Islam. I presume you've told me, I think you weren't born Muslim, right? You converted, right?
Yeah, so...
so you're British, right?
Yeah, so born and raised in London, and I was kind of raised as a Christian. I won't say devout Christian, but in the sense that I used to willingly go to the church without being told to. As in, my mom wasn't a churchgoer, but I decided at one point I wanted to get closer to God, you could say. That was when I was in my early teens. And then I guess in college, I was approached by someone about Islam, and I had no idea what Islam was. I thought Muslims worship monkeys and pigs and stuff, and then I discovered, no, they don't do that. So I went down the rabbit hole. I found out about Islam, and then when I was about 17 or 18, I accepted Islam. And about 2 years later, I got accepted to study the Islamic University of Medina in Saudi Arabia, and where I studied there for 7 years and achieved a degree in Islamic law. So I went from born Christian, became Muslim in college, went to Saudi Arabia, learned Arabic for 3 years, and then 4 years I did a degree in Islamic law. That was my, in brief, there's a lot to say, but that's my brief journey from that to Islam. And then when I graduated in 2008, I returned to the UK. My aim was to teach people about Islam and Arabic. That was my main thing. So I set up an Islamic institute to do that. And along the way, I came across Bitcoin. Now I didn't come across Bitcoin in a way to make money. That was never my intent. I think from 2012. Well, actually, from the very beginning, really, I was kind of against fiat and banking, but I didn't know why. I guess you already know this. When we kind of have this. We all have this feeling that something's not right, and I felt something was not right. And especially when my first year, when I was studying in Saudi Arabia, my wife and I, we were in Saudi. It was in 2001, and without any warning or explanation, both mine and my wife's bank account was closed, shut down, and it was at a point when we actually really needed money. Because obviously we just literally landed in Saudi Arabia. I was just a new student. I had nothing other than myself and my wife. and I tried to access my money and it was shut down. I think it was just soon after September 11th, so I don't know why, but they just shut it down. And they never gave me an explanation and anything like that. So I was kind of against banks from early on. And when I graduated and I wanted to set up my institute, I was always a kind of gold bug. I had this idea that gold is a better money and it's free and all the rest of it. I went down that whole rabbit hole of, we have to return to the gold standard. That was in 2011 and 12. And then I did hear about Bitcoin. I knew there was a thing called Bitcoin. I never rejected the idea. I kind of liked the idea because for me it was like gold. I mean, I think everyone who is not too biased in gold, if they hear about Bitcoin, they'll accept it. As long as they're not too much invested in gold. I think that's probably one of the reasons why people have issues with Bitcoin if they're gold bugs. If they're too much invested in one thing, it's become difficult to accept something else. I wasn't too much invested in gold. I liked it, but I didn't do anything about it. It was like a good idea, nice, great, but nothing happened other than that. But then I think 2017 or 16, again, more issues with banks. I think it was PayPal this time. And I was trying to accept payments on our website for lessons and courses. And I think they had some issues attaching PayPal to my website. And I was just so frustrated with the whole system. I thought to myself, why can't I just accept payments online without having to go through all this nonsense of proving who I am and whatnot? So I said to myself, let me try this Bitcoin thing. Let me see if I can add a plugin to my website that I can accept payments. And at least then I could just bypass all of that. So I found the plugin on WordPress. I downloaded the app. I installed this new feature that I can accept payment in Bitcoin. So I went to Coinbase, bought some Bitcoin. I tried it out. It worked. I paid for my own course with Bitcoin. I was like, yay, it worked. And I was so over the moon that it was so simple. I just paid for it and I got my money. It was in my hand. I was like, yeah, great. And then that was it. I left it. I went back to life. And then about a month later, I was checking on my website, see what's happening. And some reason the money I paid was more than what I paid. I was like, what? Why is it like almost double of what I usually paid for? I didn't understand. And then that was kind of the beginning of my journey into Bitcoin. So it was never about money go up. I mean, that kind of brought me to look into it more. But for me, Bitcoin was more this avenue to escape banking. That was my beginning, and it's still my mission today.
Yeah, all your life you're used to your money stealing from you, and then this thing was just giving you more suddenly.
I mean, I'm sure you know, as for Muslims, we always have an issue against banks anyway, because we don't want interest, and we always fight them in the banks with the interest. We try and tell them, I don't want your interest, just give me a normal credit account with no interest, and we had to go through that whole issue. So we've always had this ongoing frustration with banks. But then when Bitcoin came along, it was like, okay, there's my solution. It was straightforward. There was no resistance. There was no ideology to defend. It was just straightforward. Okay, this is the way forward. And then that was it, really.
Yeah, I think if you just come at it from first principles without any kind of brainwashing and baggage, as a Muslim, it should click very quickly. It should make a lot of sense very quickly, because if you think about it objectively, if you were just teleported into this planet today and all you knew was your Islamic background and you knew nothing about fiat or Bitcoin, and you examined the two, it would take you very little time to recognize, well, clearly this fiat thing is very, very against everything that Islam stands for and against all of the teachings of Sharia when it comes to money. Yeah. Whereas this Bitcoin thing, there's just no reason to object to it. I think it's very difficult to find a problem with it. But of course, most people don't think from first principles. Most people don't think in this kind of objective way. Most people bring their baggage and their brainwashing and their habits. I think most people are creatures of habits when it comes to thinking about things. And so all my life I've been using the dollars and the banks and all of these fiat things. So I'm emotionally and, religiously invested in the idea that there's nothing wrong with that, because coming to terms with the fact that I've spent decades engaging in something haram as a Muslim is a very tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
And when you first hear about Bitcoin, it has all of the hallmarks of a Ponzi scheme or a scam. I mean, this is people telling you could get rich quickly, and people saying that this thing is going to go up, and people saying it's guaranteed that nobody can change this or mess with it. It'll raise a lot of red flags for you, but if you were to actually think it through, I think you would arrive at your conclusion. And it's disappointing that not enough Muslims so far have seen this, but you and I are working to change that. So
I mean, I would say, looking at, from my years of engagement with Muslims, including scholars, trying to explain the situation, I would say that me personally, I have a kind of an advantage. Two aspects. One of them, well, three, I would say. One of them being that I'm not a stranger to going against the grain. I mean, I accepted Islam in the first place. That's the biggest thing one could do, to go against the grain, as in going against your family, your heritage, your identity, quote unquote. So if I've already changed that, then changing my currency is not that much more difficult. So I've already made that one step. Secondly, I'm already tech savvy. So I was already into technology in the first place. I build my own websites. I actually learned how to code myself. So I already have access to technical knowledge in that respect anyway. And thirdly, I've always had a long-standing hatred for banks in the first place. There was a reason to look elsewhere. So I think those three things come together for me, which would make it easier for me to accept it. Whereas from my experience of engaging with others, like for example, we're speaking to some scholars who lack, for example, the technical understanding. For example, what is a blockchain? How does it actually function? What is hashing? What is it? These things is like it's just nonsense to them. It's like you just give me words. All I want to know is this. You just want to get to the point. And there is no, unfortunately, there is no quick way of learning Bitcoin. Unfortunately, you have to do the homework. And ironically, the moment you are willing to do the homework, just the willingness to do the homework, I think that's a big step in itself, where I think most people are just not willing to, because, I mean, this is a bit of a controversial thing. I feel it might be a controversial view, but I think that for some people, for them to acknowledge Bitcoin is a better option or a good option, or the way forward even, they have to kind of acknowledge that they missed the boat. And I think some people just don't want to admit that they missed that boat. I'm not saying this of everyone, but we've all heard of Bitcoin years ago, when it was like $1, $100, $1,000, and for some people the idea of saying, well, I could have learnt back in the day, but I chose not to. If I was to now say that I was wrong, many don't want to say that. They're invested in what they're doing, and they dig their heels in. I'd be like Peter Schiff. I mean, I like the guy. He's funny. He ticks all the boxes for a Bitcoiner, but for some reason, he's just too invested in his gold. Like I said, his arguments against fiat is all the same arguments we use. There's nothing that he would say that we would say any different, but he just doesn't do it. And I think for some people, it's just that step they don't want to make it. And I've made this case to others, and I said to people, and I think people should consider this, that with money, I kind of got the gist from your book, from Bitcoin Standard, when I read it. I have you never said it in exact words, but I'm going to say it in those exact words. Money is as much a belief system as religion. It's not religious. I'm not saying it's religious, but I'm saying that in order to use money confidently, you actually have to believe it in your heart. It's not just something I receive and I use and I'm just happy with it. You have to have conviction. There is a level of conviction that is involved in that. And you see almost the exact same stages of denial when it comes to talking about religion, when you're talking to someone who's invested into fiat. The exact same arguments that they would use, the exact same behavior and mockery, all the same hallmarks of someone who's trying to resist a religious debate. You find the exact same hallmarks when it comes to fiat, because fiat is a belief system. You actually have to believe in that system at some fundamental level. So those who don't believe in it, like myself, I disbelieved in it. I made kufr with fiat. It was fine for me to reject it, whereas others, they're just too religiously invested, I think. That was my little mini rant. But yeah, that's how I think there's many reasons why it was easier for me to accept it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think I would say I don't quite like the idea to say that the idea of money being a belief system. And I think this is generally, as we say in Arabic, كلمة حق يراد بها باطل. That it contains a kernel of truth, but it's used to, it is used as a means toward a devious unjust end. In other words, usually the people who say that money is a belief system or money is a social construct or money is a collective hallucination, they're trying to sell you on a scam coin, whether it's your government's scam coin or a shit coin or whatever it is. They're trying to tell you that it's, if we all just believe hard enough in this green piece of paper, then it's money. And if we stop believing in it, then we get something like Venezuela. The problem with Venezuela is that people stop believing in it because they no longer trusted their government. That's why the currency is destroyed. And these people usually don't think of the increase in the money supply. And that's a result of a century of mal-education in the universities around the world, wherein, economics will look into all kinds of arcane and inconsequential little topics, but never discuss the increase in the supply of money, because that's the holy cow that pays their bills. Basically, if you're a fiat economist, that's where you get paid from. You get paid from inflation to justify inflation. And so there's this idea that it's all about faith, it's all about belief. And I don't like that, because it's not about faith and it's not about belief. It doesn't matter how strong and how hard people believed in seashells. As soon as gold coins got into the societies that used seashells, seashell holders were going to get wrecked. That's it. It doesn't matter how hard you believe in it. You could continue, all the richest people in that island could continue, and all of the people on that island could continue to say, we will only ever use seashells. And the result will be that they will only find themselves accumulating larger and larger quantities of seashells that are worth less and less and less over time. And the people who defect from that defective belief system of seashells as money to thinking of gold as money end up with all the wealth on the island, and the seashell people just end up with the seashells. So faith has got nothing to do with it. If everybody decided, and you hear this all the time, that it's all a collective hallucination, it's a belief system. If everybody decided that they wanted to make copper into money tomorrow, all that they're going to do is they're going to enrich copper miners, and they're going to get themselves ruined financially. There is no way that you can make copper into money, and the reasons are explained in depth in the Bitcoin Standard. So just a little aside on why I don't like to use it as a religious, I don't like to refer to money as a belief system, but I agree with you entirely in that people become invested in that story. And I think, as you mentioned, with people like Schiff and so on, it's the reality is this: if you admit that you were wrong, if you say, all right, well, Bitcoin today is $27,000, and I was wrong when I first heard about it at $5 or $50 or $500 and or $5,000, and I was wrong, and I should have bought back then. That is a very bitter reality that you choose to live. Like, you're choosing to say, I could have taken my life savings and bought, say, 1,000 Bitcoins. And now, instead, I'm going to take my life savings and get less than 1 Bitcoin or 2 Bitcoins or 3 Bitcoins. And I'm going to have to live with that realization that I was an idiot and I don't have enough Bitcoin. If you accept the reality that Bitcoin is, it works and it doesn't, and it's not a scam and it's not going to zero. So that's always a very ugly reality compared to the much more favorable reality that you could choose, which is, no, I was right at $5, I was right at $500, I was right at $5,000, and I'm still right at $27,000, and it's going to continue to I'm going to continue to be right no matter what happens to the price, and eventually, because one day they're going to wake up and they're going to find the price is zero. So that's a very hard thing to swallow. And yeah, you're right. I think people do get stuck get stuck in denial and get into it in a religious manner, and it is sad to see, particularly among Muslims, because the sad thing about it is that they've normalized the use of fiat to the point where they get to the point where they defend it. I mean, you can maybe make a case. I don't know. I'm curious about what you think of that. In a pre-Bitcoin world, What is your case for or against fiat, and what would you have done, given what you know now about money? So I'm not asking you about what you did before Bitcoin, because I'm assuming your understanding of money might have changed. So regardless of what you did before Bitcoin, I'm saying, given what you know right now, if you go back, if we get you a time machine, you go back to the year 2005. How would you use fiat as a Muslim? What is your take? What would you do? Would you hold cash? Would you use a bank account? Or would you try and get around all of these things?
I mean, so that's an interesting thing, because going back a bit further than 2000, actually, going back to 1973, I think it is. I don't know what it is. It was around that time. So I was as part of I'm trying to write a book on interest itself. And one of the issues I came across was, how did Saudi Arabia specifically, and I guess Muslim countries as a whole, but how did they go from gold or silver to fiat? We all know the narrative of America or some of the Western countries. It seems to be the same kind of thing. But how did it happen in a country where fundamentally and historically they've always been on a hard money standard? How did that flip or that switch happen, and what were the scholars at the time speaking about? So in the early times, what used to happen is that the Hujjaj, those who come to make Hajj to Saudi Arabia, they used to come and bring their various currencies, and they will exchange it for the Saudi currency, which was silver based. So Saudi Arabia was on a silver base, or silver currency, not gold. And they'll do their transactions while they're here. And when they were leaving, they'll get their currency back. And what some were doing, or quite a lot apparently, were just keeping the silver. Because obviously, again, fundamentally, Muslims all have this leaning towards gold and silver anyway. It's mentioned in the Quran, and there's a historical heritage attached to gold and silver. So what was happening was that essentially Saudi was being depleted of their silver. Every Hajj season there'll be less and less silver available in the market. So what they did is that they made this Hajj currency. So it was a currency, you could probably look at it in a museum or look online, that had various different languages and numbers. So every people from different countries, they could see this currency and they can transact as Hujjaj. And then when they return back, they can get their currency back. But this currency that they received was pegged to silver. So at the time, scholars got together and they discussed, what is this thing? Because we know about gold and silver, we know about all the rules and regulations about how to deal with business of gold and silver. But this piece of paper, how do we does it follow all the rules and regulations of gold and silver, or is it something different? The conclusion was, the TLDR, is that it was what they call Sanad. It was basically a proxy to the silver. So it followed all the same rules and regulations as silver. Fine. But apparently it was so successful as a medium of exchange, because as you mentioned in your book, what gold and silver fails at, fiat does very well, and that's to do with the speed and transaction and whatnot, and the divisibility, the weight. There's a lot of benefits that they got from it, that if the locals wanted to use a similar thing. So they kind of expanded this thing, not just to Hujjaj, but also to Saudis. But again, it was a backing 1-to-1 or whatever the ratio to the actual silver with the banks. And you can always go to the banks and redeem it. So it was always still technically on a silver standard. Until, as the story goes with all countries, at one point they decided to depeg, and it was no longer redeemable for silver. And at that point, the scholars came together again and had a discussion. What is this thing now? Because we just said before that this is the same as silver, but now it isn't. So can it still be used as a currency? Is it still halal? So the kibar ulama, or the main scholars of Saudi Arabia at the time, came together and had a meeting, and they invited the I'm not sure if it's the main head of the central bank of Saudi Arabia or representative, but he came in the meeting, and there was another guy who was, again, the translator between the scholars and the central banker, which is interesting if you think about it. Why would the central banker of Saudi Arabia need a translator? You'd assume he knows Arabic. So I don't know the answer to that, but for some reason, the central banker of Saudi Arabia didn't know Arabic. So there was a translator between the two. So the scholars asked them questions, what is this thing? They gave answers, and then the scholars gave their ta'liq, or they gave their commentary on what they said, and they issued a fatwa. The conclusion was that it is halal to use this currency. Not everyone who attended the meeting agreed to this. Like Muhammad bin Shanqiti, he abstained from agreeing to it. And some other scholars disagreed to it, but the general gist was anything that the people agreed to use as currency is permissible to use as currency. What's interesting though, if you analyze the actual fatwa, it seems as though, I'm not saying it happened, because the unfortunate reality is what the actual central banker said wasn't recorded. All we have recorded was the question that was asked to them and their response to that question, to the answer. They don't actually have the actual response, but it seems as though what was described to them isn't the same fiat system we know of today. I don't know what they said to them or how they described it, because I'm sure they never described the whole fractional reserve banking, how money is issued through interest and through debt. I'm sure it wasn't described because no issues of debt was mentioned in the whole fatwa, but it was described as a medium exchange and whatnot. So that essentially became the de facto answer to fiat globally. You could say this became the de facto fatwa for fiat, and most scholars of today who accept fiat refer to this fatwa. So from the 70s until today, you could say most scholars, or a lot of scholars, if they don't know the answer or the details, they refer to this one because obviously scholars have discussed it. So back to your question of what I have done, my journey was much like many people. I assumed fiat was how it was described in that fatwa. We all assume the thing. You put your money in the banks do, they may give that money, you give it to someone else and whatnot. However they described it, it wasn't exactly how I come to learn banking to be after coming to the Bitcoin standard. So if you said prior to Bitcoin, my assumptions of how the banks worked was totally false. So I would have just gone along with, it was Jahiliyyah, so I would have just gone along with the Fiat Standard like everyone has done. My hatred for banking only intensified after coming to Bitcoin, or that sounds like a religious statement, coming to Bitcoin. But after learning about Bitcoin and going down the rabbit hole, when you hear about Bitcoin, it pushes you to actually ask the questions, what is money? Because we just assume money is whatever's in our hands. We don't actually know, most people don't actually know what money actually is. So when you go down the rabbit hole, you actually learn how the banking system works, how it functions, how interest rates work, all that kind of stuff, how that works. So prior to knowing that, I would be honest with you, I would just would have used the fiat had and maybe use gold as a long-term storage. For your long-term savings, you have gold and silver. For your day-to-day using, we have fiat, and that would have been the end of it. But knowing how fiat works, then I don't actually have a solution, because if you remove Bitcoin from the equation, I can't see a solution. But that's kind of why I'm so bullish on Bitcoin. And the reason why I say that, and let me just caveat why I say that. Many Muslims who are gold bugs, they say to me the following. I'm sure you've heard this many times. Why don't we just issue a cryptocurrency and back it by gold? That's always the classic statement. Why don't you just issue a cryptocurrency and back it by a real world assets, which is gold? What they fail to realize is that we still have the same problem of counterparty risk. How do you maintain the peg? Yes, you have these tokens out there in the ether being used as transaction, but how do you verify that what you're using is exactly what's inside these vaults and that is backed? We come to the same problem as fiat. And that's kind of the failings of gold. Gold actually led us to that journey to fiat in the first place due to its failings. So prior to Bitcoin, I would have gone to the whole backing argument, use some kind of one-to-one peg currency. But then we would have at some point got to the same point we are now. How do you maintain that peg? How does the people who have this thing, I mean, just look at the story of Saudi Arabia. They had a peg, but then they depegged it because there's always that temptation to depeg it. And this is one of the questions I say to people. Okay, when Saudi Arabia or any other Muslim country depegged their currency from gold, effectively, you now have doubled the currency, the money in circulation. The government now has all this money at their disposal, and you have your money. Before, we only had one. You can even say that the currency had was like this. The moment you depeg, you've doubled it. I mean, I don't want to state the obvious, but if they've given you a promise to give you your gold, and then one day they're not going to give you your gold, that's effectively a broken promise. I mean, I'm not going to accuse anyone of breaking promises, but that's effectively what you've done. I've given you paper, and I said to you, I'll give you your car, or I'll give you your watch, I'll give you what I promised to give you. When you come back, I'll give it to you. And then one day you come to collect it, I'll say, oh, well, I'm not going to give it to you anymore. That's effectively a broken promise. So that whole thing is just too tempting. It's too tempting to do if you're in that position of power to make that decision. So the whole idea of pegging is fundamentally a flawed ideology. So that, I guess before Bitcoin, I would have probably said pegging because that's the only thing I could think of. But Bitcoin is the unique technology that doesn't require trust. That is the key factor. It's something that doesn't require trust in someone. And we never had that before. That's why it's so difficult for people to understand or accept this idea, because we've always had trust. Throughout history of mankind, we've always had, at some level, trust. And how do you now not have trust? So I don't know.
The syllabus for my new online economics course, Principles of Economics, is now available on Saifedean.com. The course will take place over 18 lectures, each based on one chapter from my new book, Principles of Economics, which will be available for free as an ebook for everyone registering for the course. Lectures will be released once every 2 weeks on Mondays, starting on the 25th of September 2023, and will be available in video and audio format. Live discussion seminars will be held once a week on Thursdays at alternating time slots, 12 hours apart, to ensure learners can attend from all over the world. I'm happy to announce that I have set up my new publishing house and online bookstore, The Safe House, which will be publishing and delivering the best Bitcoin and Austrian economics books worldwide in hardcover, audiobook, and ebook formats. Go to thesafehouse.com to buy my latest book, Principles of Economics, as well as the Fiat Standard and the Bitcoin Standard. And now I'm also publishing Fiat Food, Matthew Lysiak's amazing investigation into how inflation ruined our diet and health. And I'm also publishing Lynn Alden's Broken Money, her masterful exploration of the failures of the global financial system and how Bitcoin fixes it. This is a Bitcoiner's bookshop, so the books are printed in beautiful cloth hardcover made to last, with an ice-colored dust jacket on top. Go to thesafehouse.com and get yours now. I think the way that I liken it is that, imagine if you're a Muslim and you get shipwrecked on an island, and you look around that island, and the only thing that you can eat there, the island only has grass and pigs on it. And you can't live off of grass, but you can survive off of pigs.
Yeah.
I think, I think no matter how devout you are, you would hunt a pig and slaughter it and eat it rather than die.
Yeah, 100%.
I think I can understand why Muslims would use fiat in this world. Individuals, it's less understandable if you're a government, perhaps, although they have their own risk calculation, which perhaps might make it understandable if we knew the kind of pressure they come under. But in any case, I could see it as justifiable to use fiat in that case. But I think the interesting thing here is now that we've got an entire generation of Muslims who grew up on this island eating nothing but pork. And now when we've managed to get beef on the island, now that we have cows on the island, they are looking at this cow and they're saying, well, what is this weird animal? We don't want to eat it. We want to stick to the tried and tested halal pork that the sheikh told us is halal years ago, because it's the only... if somebody told you it was halal, it was understandable, perhaps because in the context of it being the only meat on the island, then yeah, you could eat it. But now you've got healthy, wholesome halal beef, and therefore you have no excuses for pork. I think this is the point that needs to be driven home for Muslims. But perhaps we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Tell us your view on why fiat is haram. What is wrong with fiat from the Islamic perspective?
From an Islamic perspective, it fundamentally comes down to, I would say, this comes back to the fatwa I mentioned earlier on. If it were the case that a government was to issue fiat notes, whatever the case may be, yeah, and people were to use this currency as it was issued, and the money supply was fixed, it wasn't something that was dependent on interest, it wasn't something that could be printed or connected to riba in the first place, then it's possible that it could be used as a medium of exchange, because like the fatwa that the scholars used, they connected it back to the statement of Imam Malik, where he was asked about currency and whatnot, and he said if the people were to agree to use donkey hide or cow hide as a medium of exchange, then so be it. And that's kind of what Tariq mentioned when you had the interview with him. He mentioned that similar thing. So if we were to agree to use this thing as a medium of exchange, then so be it. And so fundamentally, the idea of having pieces of paper to exchange which is fiat, I don't fundamentally have an issue with it like that. Besides the fact that it costs nothing to make. I mean, that is a big issue for me, because then you have the issue of the canteen effect. I mean, who has the right to print this thing? And under what circumstances do they have to print it? With gold, and even with donkey hide or cowhide, you still have to go out and make the thing, or actually get the thing. There's still some kind of work attached to it. But with fiat, if it's just a computer thing, you can just issue it. That's why I made the caveat that if they made a one-off decision, they said, okay, oh people, we need this fiat now to transact. We can't use gold anymore, so we're going to make a one-time issuance of fiat, and that'll be it. Fair enough. I can imagine that being somewhat feasible, but the problem with fiat is that it's intrinsically attached. Its issuance, its creation, and its destruction to riba. It's this fundamental usury. It's this fundamental property of attaching it to interest, which makes it all that more distasteful and all that more reason. It's actually more than just pork, because if you look at the Islamic text and it talks about sins, it is mentioned the mubiqat, or the destructive sins. It's actually interesting because if you look at the 7 deadly sins in Christianity, most of them are attached to internal things like lust and sloth and these kind of feelings or things related to the internal. Whereas in Islam, what the mubiqat, the 7 mubiqat, or the 7 deadly sins, they're actually attached to actions. And that's technically how Islam views sins. Islam doesn't penalize you or punish you for your thoughts in your head. As long as it remains in your head and you don't act upon it, then you're forgiven. Because obviously you chose not to act upon it. But the moment you act upon it, the moment you manifest that sinful thought into reality, then you're held accountable. And of those 7 deadly sins, not one of them was pork, but it was interest. So if you look at, interest is even worse. The analogy you gave was a perfect analogy. And on the desert island, you're eating pork, that's bad enough in its own. And most Muslims understand the prohibition of pork. But for some reason, we seem to be so complacent, accepting of what is far worse and far more destructive and harmful and prohibited, which is interest. And there's been so many texts that have been revealed about the punishment, the specific punishment of the one who takes and gives out interest on the Day of Judgment. To have this intrinsically woven within the fabric of fiat makes it something which Muslims have to actively find a way to get out of it. So that's why I'm so grateful that Allah granted us with Bitcoin, because up until Bitcoin, we didn't feasibly have an option. Yes, you could have said gold, but gold isn't feasible. You can't do international trade with gold. You can't do online commerce with gold. You can't really use gold unless you involve a third party, which brings back to the same issue of counterparty risk. You don't really have an alternative, whereas Bitcoin gave us that alternative. So fundamentally, yes, it comes down to, I would say that if I was to summarize, the fact that fiat is issued, is created and destroyed via interest. That's the first thing. And the second issue I have with fiat is the fact that its issuance costs nothing. So therefore, what right do you have to have that money? Generally speaking, in Islam, when it comes to transactions, financial transactions, one of the fundamental underlying principles of all transactions is huquq. What rights do you have to give and take something? So if you have fiat, essentially you are giving yourself the right to have money. For what reason? What gives you the right to have this money? To go to the computer and you type in the money, what gives you the reason? If I have gold, the right that I have to have, the right I have to own that gold is that I went to the mountain, I exerted effort, I invested time, and I mined the gold, I refined the gold. That effort, we could say, justifies the fact that I own that gold. You can't say that for fiat. There's nothing that justifies owning fiat. So those two things I would say are the two main premises attached to it. There's a third one which I've heard some say. They say that the issuance of fiat is riba. I don't agree with that because I don't see how that's riba. Riba is based on a loan. The issuance of just the issue of, I'm talking about the printing of money. I'm talking about the printing of money through loans. I'm just saying just the M1, you could say, printing of money, which is most likely not the money that people have. But I don't think that's necessarily riba. But just, yeah, the first two I would say is the two main objections attached to fiat.
I'm going to probably disagree with you here, if you'll allow me. Now, I'm no religious scholar, but I'm going to take a stab at offering you an alternative perspective here. So I think the key problem I have with your explanation is that the vast majority of fiat money is not paper. Paper only constitutes about 5%, maybe 10% maximum of the money supply. So if you look at how many dollars there are, whatever measure of dollars you use, physical dollars, dollar bills are a tiny fraction of it. So I agree with you. I agree with the idea that in Islam there's no fixed, there's no direct stipulation that gold and silver have to be money, that people can use anything as money. And at the end of the day, it's sort of inevitable that you would have something like this because, I mean, you can exchange, you can barter things. And so therefore you can use anything for barter. And if you can use anything for barter, then you can use anything as money. So yeah, you could use a piece of paper as money if you choose to. But I think the issue is that with fiat, you got to think of the paper fiat money as being similar to an open dime. Good opportunity to plug our sponsors, CoinKite, who make the open dime, which is a great idea. It's a tiny little USB drive where you can have a Bitcoin stored on it, and it has the physical, it has the private key stored on it in a manner that is tamper-proof. So you know if the open dime has not been opened, then it lights up green, and you know that private key on it has not been seen by anybody. But if you tamper with it, you break it, then you can see that you know that somebody could have accessed the private key. So in a sense, an open dime that has not been opened is a physical representation of a Bitcoin.
Yes.
It's not how Bitcoin comes into existence. So the Bitcoin comes into existence through the process of mining, and then Rodolfo at CoinKite makes that open dime, and then you can load it with the Bitcoin on it. And now you have physical Bitcoin that's stored there, for which there is no private key anywhere. So effectively, it's an offline Bitcoin. It's a physical Bitcoin. I think that's an excellent way of understanding how fiat paper money comes into existence. The actual money comes into existence through the process of fiat mining, which I describe in detail in the Fiat Standard, which is through the creation of debt. There's always debt creation that is involved in the creation of the dollars. And then the treasury will print some of these. So the treasury is their version of Rodolfo, basically, Novak, CoinKite. They take some of the dollars that already exist, the bank that has the money, and they give them some of that money in dollars. So the way in which the dollars actually come into existence is not through the printing. The printing just brings some of the already existing dollars into physical form. But the way that the dollars come into existence is through the creation of loans. And I think there's, in the US at least, there's no alternative way of doing it. In for instance, I think in Lebanon, when they had hyperinflation, in Zimbabwe and Venezuela, you do have money creation that could arguably be called halal, in that they just run the money printer and they make a ton of money, and then they start paying government employees. And when you do that, of course, it may be halal, but it destroys the value of the currency, because it's just you're increasing the supply drastically, and then you get hyperinflation when that happens. But that's not how euros and dollars and all these relatively national fiat currencies are brought into existence. So the way that these come into existence is the banks make a loan. And so when you go to take out a mortgage from a bank, say you want to buy a house for $1 million, you go to the bank, you ask them to give you a loan for $1 million. They do not take the $1 million from their own capital and give them to you to buy your house. And they do not take $1 million from their depositors and take the money and give it to you so that you could buy the house. They make those $1 million. Those $1 million are created in order to make the loan for you. And so that's the only way that dollars come into existence. It could be the bank, or it could be the Federal Reserve buying treasury bonds, treasury bonds are also a riba contract, because it's a loan. A treasury bond is a loan. You give them the $1,000 for the bond, and then they promise to be paying you a certain coupon over time. And in both cases, there's interest involved, and in both cases it's usurious. So I don't see how you could say that fiat money is not riba at the base layer level. I think if you, and then that's, I think the founding concept on which I built the entire book of the Fiat Standard is just the realization that you mine fiat by issuing debt. I think this is really I remember when I was beginning to think about writing that book, beginning to formulate the ideas for the Fiat Standard, and then I started drawing analogies with Bitcoin and thought to myself, well, how do you mine fiat? And when it hit me that mining fiat is debt creation, everything fell into place. The entire fiat system began to make sense. Once you see it through that lens, it's such a powerful moment of clarity, because that's why everything in the world is based around debt. That's why everything has debt in it. That's why everything is, and it makes a lot of sense, because that's how you mine it, and there's no difficulty adjustment, and so we're always mining more and more. And so I don't think you could separate fiat money in its current form from riba, except in the cases of hyperinflation, when you just print large quantities of money in order to hand it over to people. So therefore, for me, I think that's that's why I would say it's at the protocol level haram.
Well, I mean, I 100% agree with you on that one, and that's actually why I decided to myself live the ideology that I try to teach. So since 2020. I've decided to live 100% on Bitcoin. So any fiat I receive from wages or anything like that, I immediately dump it into Bitcoin, and I just found ways to spend Bitcoin directly. Now, I'm not saying that I have zero balance in my bank balance, but it's near zero almost all the time. It's literally about £10, £20, maybe £30 inside there, or for those who are in America, that's like a couple of, it's no more than $50. And that's just for any kind of payments that come out that I don't want to be in overdraft. But literally, I believe fundamentally that I want to exit the fiat system, because I don't want to be that one who's eating pork when I don't need to. Like you said, why eat pork when there's no need to eat pork? The only challenge I have is that everyone around me still wants to serve pork. That's the challenge. But when people always say to me, oh yeah, but how can you live on Bitcoin? It's not possible to live on Bitcoin. I always say to them, look, I've been doing it for the last 3 years. I travel with Bitcoin. I buy airplane tickets with Bitcoin. I pay my rent in Bitcoin. I pay my utility bills in Bitcoin. I spend entirely on Bitcoin. Now, there is a caveat to that. Obviously, they don't receive Bitcoin. There's that conversion through whichever Bitcoin debit card I use, or whichever gift card I have to purchase, I have to spend. There is that. But the way I view that is that that's their decision. That's not my decision. I choose not to be in that system, but they choose to stay that way. So if the only way to interact with them is by giving them what they want, then that's part of their process. That's not part of my process, the way I live. If someone wants to accept Bitcoin, I give them Bitcoin. But I think as Muslims, unless you make the conscious effort to say, look, I want to exit the system, even if I receive a 2% or 4% hit on Bitcoin in the market, so be it. That's the cost of trying to live halal. It's just like, for example, yeah, there's pork right here. Maybe to eat that halal beef, I have to travel an hour down the road. That's the cost of eating halal. It is what it is. As Muslims, you have to recognize that this whole world that we live in is a test. We're not here to live a nice life and be all comfy. I mean, yeah, you can do that by all means, but we're here to be tested. And I think most people have to recognize that one of the biggest tests you will face is in your wealth, your income, your money. That's usually where the test comes. I mean, how many Muslims are tested with just about 2.5% of Zakat? They don't want to give that. So I'm prepared, and I think Muslims should be prepared to try their best at all cost to live outside the system, even if it means, maybe if you want to go by the gold standard, do that. But try your best to exit the system as much as possible, because as long as you're in it, you're feeding it. And I just don't think that we should feed the beast, as they say. That's how I think we should try our best.
Yeah. So, what do you think of this idea? Well, we've had this discussion briefly on Twitter before, which is, ultimately, you can't really escape the system, even if you're holding the $10 or $20 in your bank account. you are feeding the system. And the more you hold the dollars, you're allowing the system to basically devalue your dollars in order to create more users' loans and to give out more loans. So, I mean, if you're already holding the dollars and if they're already getting devalued anyway, so you are part of it. What do you say to the idea that you might as well just fight it from within if you're stuck on the island and forced to be eating the pork? Why not try and use that in order to bring about cows? Why not trade the pigs in order to be able to build a boat that allows you to go to another island and import cows? In other words, why not take out a loan in fiat and use that to buy Bitcoin? And then over time, you would accumulate more and more Bitcoin and you would help create more and more fiat, which leads to the devaluation of fiat and to the appreciation of Bitcoin, effectively performing a speculative attack on the fiat, which is, essentially that's what George Soros did to the British pound in 1991, I think it was, when he brought down the value of the pound. That's what anybody does. If you're able to borrow fiat and you buy Bitcoin with it in the long run, the Bitcoin appreciates, and so you end up better off. Could you make the Islamic case for this, or do you think that's?
Yeah, I remember when Michael Saylor mentioned that to you in the interview, and that interview was very eye-opening in terms of how the rich maintain their riches in the system, how they game the system for their own benefit, and it kind of opens up and explains a lot of things that I used to wonder to myself. Why does Apple, with like almost a balance, a float of like $1 trillion, still take out loans to do X, Y, and Z? Why do these companies still take out loans, although they have the money to pay themselves? In my mind, it never made sense to me until Michael Saylor explained it to me. I was like, that's actually the game. The game is that essentially the way I see the game is fiat are for the plebs, for the lowly people, for the commoners. We think that money, having £1 million, £5 million, that makes you rich. Whereas the rich man he's learnt the game a long time ago. The pounds is nothing. It's the assets that make something. It's the houses. It's the art, the fine art that we mock them for. It's these other things that actually holds their value and actually grows their wealth, not the fiat. It's only when we're poor like us we think, okay, the fiat is what you want to have. But Islamically speaking, there's two things to say about that. Number one is that the speculative attack on fiat, the reason I won't agree with that is that essentially you'll be taking part in the harm of others. So essentially inflation is every time I'll say to people sometimes that one of the problems of taking out these loans from the bank is that you effectively are causing inflation. You're effectively, by your actions, even if it's minute on an individual level, very minute, but at some level you are harming the collective. And one of the main premises of Islamic economics is not to harm the collective, is that we do things for the benefit of the collective. So the idea, imagine I was, what's his name? George Soros. Imagine I was him in his shoes. I could never do what he did because effectively I benefited from other people's losses directly. It's not like a trade where, that's why in Islam, when we do a business trade, I give you something and you give me something, and the premise is that we are both benefiting from the trade. Effectively what he did is that he benefited from the trade and others lost out big time. The pension companies, all these people who invested heavily in the pound, they're the ones who actually lost out in the trade, and they never had any decision in the trade. It was something that was imposed upon them. So fundamentally, every time a person takes out a loan, from an Islamic perspective, you are contributing to the harm, the collective harm of the others. Now, the flip side of that, unfortunately, is that the harm is coming anyway. That's what you're saying. You're saying that the end game of fiat anyway is down. There is no
and you're participating in it even with your $20 in your bank account that you need to use for your business.
So at every level, it's happening anyway. So the only way, my only counter to that counter is that fair enough, I get that, but fundamentally, from an Islamic perspective, we try our best to minimize as much as possible. So there's a principle that if you have two evils, that you have two choices. You have to choose one of them. There's no option. There's either this one or that one. It's an obligation from Islam to choose the lesser of two evils. So my $20, just so that I don't go into overdrawn, because I have to have it, because at some point I have to pay, someone might want payment. That's lesser evil than taking out a loan on the house, which is causing a larger damage to the overall collective than the £10. So if I have to do one of the two, I would do that. If I could close down all bank accounts entirely and just go totally off the grid, I would do that. It's just that at this stage in my life, I actually just cannot do that. I mean, there is no way I can actually do that. I have I actually pay every avenue I can pay something with a debit card, I use Bitcoin. But there are just some things I just have to pay for a direct bank transfer. Like the other day, I booked a hotel, I booked an apartment I did Umrah, booked an apartment, and the guy refused to take debit card and refused to take cash. He would take cash, but I didn't have cash. He said, I have to do bank transfers. I had no choice. So for those moments where I have to do a bank transfer, that's what that float is. And even with that, I tend to just sell some Bitcoin, and then when I sell it, I transfer it, and that's it. So I literally go to spot, sell it, transfer to my bank account, and then send it out. But back to your question, the first thing is that I would disagree with that, because you're effectively taking part in what's already happening, but you're actually contributing to it. So yeah, if it's happening, fine, but don't just make it worse by doing it. So it's almost like saying, imagine someone is dying. They're dying anyway. I mean, just give it 5 minutes, they're dead. And you go there and you keep on giving extra punches. You don't do that. You just, I don't join in the fun. That is what it is. And secondly, if we're going to battle a system, you don't battle it with haram. So yes, riba is evil. I don't like riba. I don't like the whole system, the IMF, the World Bank, all this stuff. I hate all of it. But I'm not going to play their game to fight them. I want to fight them with halal. And that's why I believe that fundamentally, and this is what I'm trying to do myself now, fundamentally, if Muslims take this approach of working against the grain, forcing their own hand to live in Bitcoin, that forces them to now find avenues and solutions. If you just go by the normal riba system and you fight it that way, you become complacent that you don't actually find alternatives. You don't actually find ways to do things in a halal way. For example, everyone always asks me, how can I buy a house without interest? Well, maybe the reason I don't have an answer is because I was never put in that position, or we as a collective weren't really forced hard enough to find a solution. Because we have Islamic finance and these other Islamic alternatives, or because we have fatwa saying, oh, you can take a mortgage for one house, because we have these alternatives, we just don't bother looking anymore. We say, okay, this sheikh said it's halal, so I'll just do that anyway and make life is easy, done. Whereas I guarantee you, if there was a collective consensus of all the scholars, fiat is haram, mortgage is haram, under all circumstances, no one could do any commerce unless it's with halal. But I guarantee you, by the end of this year, you have solutions. It's because you don't have them, because we're not forced, we don't do that. So that's the two reasons why I wouldn't agree with that even then. Because number one, it stops you from trying. And number two, you take the lesser of two evils. You take the lesser as much as possible of two evils. And that includes, by the way, for those who are listening, that includes renting rather than a mortgage. People say, oh, I don't want to rent. What's wrong with renting? It's not haram. Renting is perfectly halal. How can you say, I don't want to do the halal, which is renting, but I want to do the haram, which is mortgage, because of some narrative that you must have a house? No, Allah has given you an alternative, which is rent. Yeah, maybe you might pay more in the long run, but at least it's halal. Remember, we don't work for this dunya, we don't work for this life, we work for the hereafter. I want to work in my life that when I die, my book is clean. I have no sins in there that is going to put me into hellfire. Why would I want to put on that book record a massive stamp of mortgage and then stand on the day of judgment? Oh Allah, I had to because everyone around me's got a house, my friends have a house, my auntie has a house. I wanted a house. That's not an excuse. You have an alternative. So the lesser of two evils is to rent. And maybe you save your money you have and then try as much as you can. Or alternatively buy Bitcoin and DCA Bitcoin until you can buy a house.
Yeah, I mean, all of these are moot questions now that we have Bitcoin, because it is the way out. It really is. But I guess now with Bitcoin, if I were to make the counter argument, I have to say I agree with you. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Quite literally the devil's advocate, perhaps. But I think if I were to make the devil's case here, I'd say, well, maybe perhaps not so much the devil. I'd say the vigilante case here is that, okay, you're doing haram anyway, but at least by taking out a loan, you are helping bring the system down. Perhaps that would be the case, but no, I still agree with you, because I think, these things are not haram just because God is choosing to give us hardships. It's not arbitrarily haram. Of course, there are risks involved. Taking out a mortgage is not a walk in the park. Taking out a mortgage means every month you need to be sure that you can make the payment, and you have to live under the stress for 30 years, and you could end up losing your house after having made 15 years of payments or 20 years of payments. It's not a picnic. It is a very difficult thing to do. But yes, I think ultimately with Bitcoin, all of these questions become moot, because with Bitcoin you have the answer. You don't need to, you can rent and just keep stacking sats, and then you'll be able to afford a house. The difficult thing is that without Bitcoin, and this is really when you understand how the system works, and I didn't understand it this much until I really wrote the Fiat Standard and got very well internalized the idea that Bitcoin is fiat mining. The travesty of fiat for Muslims is that effectively it's a tax on you being a Muslim. Fiat is a tax on being a Muslim, because fiat is forcing everybody who holds money and doesn't get into debt to subsidize everybody who does. And so the rational strategy there is to take out debt, because if you're not taking out debt and if you're saving, you are still participating in riba, because you're holding the money that was created when the other people got into riba. But the difference is that they got a house out of it. You're just paying for the house.
100%.
So you're paying for the house, and your savings are depreciating over time. So if you're trying to save money in the bank account in order to buy a house and saying, I'm not going to get into riba, you're running on a treadmill, because the house just keeps getting further away from you, because the price of the house keeps going up
100%.
And the value of your money keeps going down. And the people who got in at the mortgage managed to get the house at a very low price. So, if I choose to do the halal thing, whereas you choose to take out the mortgage, you buy the house today. I buy the house. I'm hoping to buy the house at 10 years from now. 10 years from now, the money that I'm saving today is going to have depreciated significantly. Whereas the money, and so I'm putting it as savings and it's depreciating. And 10 years from now, the value of the house is going to go up. Whereas on your case, the money that you paid today is already cleared up a part of your mortgage payment. So it is effectively a tax on you being a Muslim. And there are no easy solutions without Bitcoin. And that's why I think it's really imperative for Muslims to start paying attention to Bitcoin, because it's your only way out of this. If you don't use Bitcoin, you are really going to continue to run on this treadmill and not understand why is it that everybody who is in haram and who is in the mortgage, who's taking out loans, is able to afford a house, whereas it is incredibly hard for me to do it.
I mean, just to reinforce what you're saying. So if you can back to the issue of the house, there was an excellent tweet that I saw of a guy who decided to DCA Bitcoin $500 a month since 2017, and up until August, because when I saw it, he had accumulated about 4.3 Bitcoin. That's amazing if you think about it. $500 a month since 2017, or I think it was 16 or 17, and he's acquired 4 Bitcoin. So that's in a space of 5 years, 4 Bitcoin. Guaranteed in the next probably 3 to 4 years, that's enough to buy a house. So there, like you said, there actually isn't an alternative. There isn't really an alternative to escape this treadmill if you're adamant in holding Bitcoin, fiat. Fiat is just it's an ongoing tax. Whoever wants to hold it is suffering the loss of value, the constant loss of value, and you're subsidizing those who have taken advantage of the loan. The only way out of it is to exit a system, and you find that Bitcoin allows you to do the opposite. I mean, a case could be made loosely that maybe with gold you can technically do a similar thing, but in terms of I guess acquiring a home or whatnot, or increasing your value, you don't have that same kind of premium that you do with Bitcoin. And maybe that won't remain with Bitcoin. Maybe there will come a point when Bitcoin, the increase in value would plateau. Who knows? But definitely in the long run, there isn't really an option for a Muslim to save, really, if he outside of Bitcoin that I can see. I mean, some might use other shitcoins, but I don't advocate for that. I think it'll be probably as worse as it's pretty much the same as fiat.
Yeah, I think I'm just running the numbers now in the background. I'm looking at what you could have achieved if you started DCAing Bitcoin in 2016. So you were buying $500 of Bitcoin in October 2016. Until today, that's 7 years of $500 a month. Today, you would have spent $42,500, but you would have $224,800. So that's 8.2 Bitcoin. Yeah, so the return on investment is 428.96%. Now let's try and do the same thing with the S&P 500, and that's done relatively pretty well. Let's see, monthly investment $500. All right, so now I've done the numbers for the S&P 500 as well, and if you had, you would have invested $42,000 as well, and you would have a grand total of $56,084. So $56,000 if you had invested in the S&P 500, which has done relatively well during that period, versus $224,000 if you had invested in Bitcoin over that period. And if you just held on to your dollars, you'd only have 42. And if you bought gold, I don't quite know what it is, but it's going to be closer to 42 than the 56 of the S&P 500, and definitely nowhere near the return on Bitcoin. So this is really, I think, the key thing to understand. The only way for you to beat the fiat inflation, which is at the heart of the usury that you want to stay away from as a Muslim, is Bitcoin. That's the only way that you can get ahead. $42,000 can be converted into $224,000 by just stacking. So definitely a case to be made there. So now you've told us why you think fiat is haram, but now why do you think Bitcoin is halal? What is your halal case for Bitcoin?
So, I mean, the basic premise, the easiest answer to that question would be the principle that al-asl fil ashya al-hil. The general rule of everything is that it is halal. Bitcoin, by default, is halal, and the case needs to be made from an Islamic perspective that it is haram. This is why I always try to get this across to people when I explain to them Bitcoin. I said, look, they say to me, oh, how do you know it's halal? What's your evidence that it's halal? And I say, that's not how it works in Islam. Islam is not a religion whereby everything is forbidden unless you have these rules of some things that are halal. No, everything is permissible in this world by default. I don't have to make any special case why it's halal. It's halal by default, it's permissible by default. The case needs to be made that it is haram. That includes fiat, by the way. So, I mean, I can even say that same thing to fiat, because if fiat is by default halal, why not? Why can't I use fiat? And then you would say, well, because it's interest. And then you say, okay, there you go. You made your point. You've justified why fiat is haram. So likewise, apply that same rule to Bitcoin. What is Bitcoin? It's a ledger recording numbers that can be used for exchange. Can I receive that in my wallet? Is it halal? Yes, it is. Because there's nothing to say I can't. Why can't I receive this Bitcoin? Why can't I send that Bitcoin? Why can't I have that and own it? What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong that says that it's haram, number one. So that's the case. That's just the baseline case to say it's allowed. But to go that step further and to say why it's necessary, that would be to say that Bitcoin engulfs the properties that makes gold useful for us, but goes a step further by removing the properties of that gold that makes gold difficult to use. So we have this ability to transact through space instantly with Bitcoin, which you don't have with gold. You remove the issue of weight, storage. You remove that whole. I mean, as you know, Muslims have a long history of memorization. We memorize the Quran, we memorize Hadith, Islamic texts. We have a long-standing history throughout centuries of memorizing things. What better solution to have a currency that you just memorize 12 words and you can carry that around with you everywhere you are. Imagine a whole nation of Muslims who not only they memorize Fatiha, but they memorize 12 words that carry around with them their money. That's it. That's all they need to do is carry around those 12 words. So after every salah, when they do their adhkar, do their dhikr, their remembrance of Allah, they can just revise their 12 words, and that's it every day. You're carrying around with you your currency. So therefore, you've gained the benefit of gold and removed all the issues attached to gold. So that's the first case. And the second case, like we just mentioned over and over again, it's the only real solution to our fiat problem, which is definitely a problem. Every single Muslim country has at some level been harmed, seriously harmed by fiat. I mean, just look at Turkey, just look at Lebanon, look at Iraq, look at Iran, almost every single Muslim country. I mean, just look at Afghanistan. They had $4 billion of their currency just held by the American government for no valid explanation because they don't like their government or they don't like their policy, just held it. So we're already seeing in this day and age, Muslim nations, states, governments, people are harmed on a daily basis by fiat. So why are we as a collective still holding on to this thing? It's almost like an abused wife where you say to her, look, you know you can get talaq, you can get divorced. No. I'm happy with the beating. Every day I'll just take it because I see no other solution. No, there are other solutions. There are other solutions out there. So yeah, so back to the point. Bitcoin as a base layer, it's halal. But to add to that, it's a solution out of fiat. Now, one could say, okay, if there was another currency that did the exact same thing as Bitcoin, but it's not Bitcoin, what would you say about that? I'll say if it has all the properties of Bitcoin, then why not? I mean, there's nothing intrinsically about the code of Bitcoin that makes it special, but there are properties attached to Bitcoin that makes Bitcoin special. So, like I said, you can go to GitHub, clone the repository, and launch your own Saifedean coin or your own Tucker coin, and you'll be exact clone of Bitcoin. But it's not Bitcoin because there's more to Bitcoin than just the actual code. There's the consensus that has built around it. There's the miners, there's the infrastructure. There's so much things attached to Bitcoin that you can't actually, well, not feasibly, replicate that. If you could, then so be it. That coin and Bitcoin and whatever, whichever one possible. I'm not saying Bitcoin is sent from the heavens. It's not like that. But Bitcoin does have properties that, number one, are unique to Bitcoin. And number two, I would argue, is almost impossible to do again. You can't do it again. You can't redo a Bitcoin. The history of Bitcoin is so unique. You can't replicate that at all. It's not possible. So rather than try to reinvent the wheel and fail, like so many have done and are still trying to do with all these CBDCs who try to reinvent the Bitcoin and do our own blockchain, rather than try and reinvent the wheel and fail it anyway, adopt what's already here, get behind it, and allow yourself to benefit from its infrastructure. I mean, look at El Salvador's doing. Therefore, they've seen the future and they're getting behind it and it's benefiting them. So I reckon Muslim countries should try their best right now to get behind it before it's too late. Because like I said, once the game theory starts kicking in and other countries already start mining, which is already happening, nation states are already mining Bitcoin. I think if Muslim nations get behind it, they can now release themselves from the current system that they are in and be in a more fairer system. And that will be the last point I'll mention, the issue of fairness. One property about gold, which is very important, and that is its intrinsic fairness about it. There's nothing about gold which means by default you have privilege. Whereas fiat, there is privilege attached to it. Likewise, the Bitcoin, which is even more so, there is no privilege attached to any holder of Bitcoin. You may hold millions of Bitcoin, but that doesn't give you any privilege over the network. And that is a property which is necessary right now. A currency that no one has control over. It's just there. You use it, you benefit from it. If you don't want to use it, you're only harming yourself. So fair enough. We need that non-bias, non-censorable, decentralized network that we all use in fairness. That's why I don't even advocate for a Muslim coin or an Islamic coin. It's just stupid. Why have an Islamic coin? We need a coin that is open for humanity. Anyone can use it. That's what makes it fair. That's what makes it useful. No one's gonna transact with an Islamic coin. Well, actually, some may be stupid enough to use the Islamic coin, but you need a coin that is nothing. It's just there. It has no political agenda. It has no ideology. It has no leaning. It's not left. It's not right. It's just there. Use it. And that's what gold is. Gold is just there.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. Now, what about other currencies, other digital currencies, or I shouldn't say other digital currencies, I should say, what about cryptocurrencies? What about things other than Bitcoin? What is your Islamic opinion of them?
So, my Islamic opinion on them has developed somewhat from 2017. So, like I said, when I heard about Bitcoin, I had no idea there were other coins. Be realistic. I only found out there were other coins when I downloaded an app and I was trying to install it on my website. And when I tried to click Bitcoin, there was this list of other coins. There was Feather Coin, and then there was another Litecoin. There was other coins. I had no idea what they were. So I just kind of ignored them. I didn't know what they were. I ignored them. And then as I went down the rabbit hole, I discovered there was Ethereum and there's other coins, these other coins. And then, as you normally do, you think, oh wait, you kind of buy into the narratives. Oh, this coin you can do this with it, and this coin you could do that with it, and it sounded interesting to me as an idea. I was never really pushing the idea of that these coins could be a currency, because as a currency, Bitcoin is Bitcoin. But these other coins, they gave these narratives that you could do this with it. You could do decentralized internet, and you can have decentralized this and that and the other. It sounded interesting to me at the time. But as I started to learn more about Bitcoin and through experience, you realize that those ideas they had, even if they were interesting, even if they were good ideas, you don't need to issue a new coin for it. And it kind of revealed the secret that they're just basically scams. They're only issuing the coin so they can kind of get around the securities thing, or they can get a cash injection into their ideas, and then they can develop the ideas. Some have good ideas, and some actually wanted to do these good ideas. You know, some were genuine, and maybe this was an idea to get these coins out there, and it can fund development. Maybe some of the innocent. I'm not gonna say all of them were actual scams trying to rob you, but the incentives always turn out that way. You've now got $1, $10, $50 million worth of these coins from selling on the market. What incentive do you have to actually fulfill your promise? You promised to deliver a decentralized internet through your system and your tokens. You've sold your tokens. You got the money now. I mean, what's pushing me now to do the job? And that's the problem. So there was this one token, I'm not gonna mention the name, that had a really good idea. It was, again, I mentioned it was decentralized internet. The idea was that you have these nodes, you can run your own program, you can essentially share your bandwidth and get paid for the use of your bandwidth. It's like a Tor, basically. They're telling you they want to replicate Tor, but rather than Tor being a voluntary thing, you can get paid for it. Sounds like a good idea, innit? So I said to the guys, look, I looked at your thing, it looks quite good. I like the idea, but why not just use Bitcoin? And you can imagine that when I mentioned that, the room went quiet, because how would you fund your activity then? I mean, it was quickly shut down as an idea. And at that point, I kind of realized, what is really the goal here? Because your idea is a good idea. You've got the code base. You've already produced like a beta model of your thing. So why not just use Lightning? I mean, it's even better. How does it even make sense to run a decentralized network using an Ethereum token? Just to use a network, you have to buy ETH just to use your token. It makes no sense. Just use Lightning. Lightning is Lightning, and you can send packets of Bitcoin, Satoshis, with your data. That makes more sense. But the idea was never taken up, because the incentive is not to actually build your project, it's to actually make money. So my conclusion after a long look at these projects, I used to consult for crypto investments. That's why my initial name was Crypto Hash Review. My idea was I would give you a review, an Islamic review of your crypto. And after advising many people and being paid for it even, the conclusion was, just buy Bitcoin. You're wasting your time. It doesn't make any sense. And alhamdulillah, I've saved many people from disaster. They paid for my consultation. They brought me their shitcoin, and I said to them, just sell your coin and buy Bitcoin. And one brother was like, no, brother, they got a good team, and look at this and look at that. I said, look, I'm telling you, just buy Bitcoin. And the guy reluctantly said, oh, okay. I knew he kind of wasn't really feeling it. But alhamdulillah, about 3 months after that, he came back to me and said, you know what, brother, thank you. Jazakallah khair, because literally a few weeks after that, it went to zero. So, alhamdulillah, I saved many people's lives from that. So, in conclusion, my view now about other currencies is that I do believe there is a future in the tokenization of real world assets as a mechanism of making it easy to buy and invest. So I have property. I have a property. I want to sell it. I can't find a buyer who's going to buy the entire property. But if I tokenize a property, maybe there will be 100 buyers who buy the token, so I can essentially get my liquidity, my value of my property. And now these people can be shared owners in this real world asset. I see a future in that. And you can do that on Liquid Network and whatnot. I see a future in that. But as for issuing tokens that have some kind of function in the network, no, I don't think there's a need, and I just don't think it would make much sense. The only problem, however, with this tokenization of things is that it needs backing or some kind of enforcement from government. So although you're using the rails of some kind of network, the only benefit you get from that is the instant ability to just sell it. So I can literally, on a website, I can exchange this token for money, and the instant means of gaining liquidity. But besides that one benefit, I don't really see a benefit in tokens per se. That's kind of my conclusion. I mean, I'm welcome to be proven wrong, but my experience, I just don't see any purpose of using anything other than Bitcoin because, and again, let's just conclude in case I didn't get the gist, because when you take out the token from a project, if your idea doesn't work, then it most likely is a Ponzi or a scam. Why use something new, or why make something new when you already have Bitcoin? Yeah, that's my basic conclusion.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people obviously see the stories of the shitcoiners that managed to make significant gains, but there's at least 25,000 digital currencies other than Bitcoin right now. But there's a handful, or maybe two handfuls, of currencies that have outperformed Bitcoin over any kind of significant period of time. And so the idea that you could have picked these few currencies out of the sea of thousands and tens of thousands of others is complete fiction. And of course, this is survivorship bias. You look at the ones that successfully picked, well, I wouldn't say successfully, that luckily picked.
Luckily picked, yeah. It was an purely luck.
Yeah, that luckily picked the ones that ended up shooting up. And of course, these people end up having more money and end up becoming more visible and end up telling the world about their story. And you think this is, and so if you look at these 5 or 4 or 10 or no matter how many currencies and their people, you think, yeah, you can outperform Bitcoin with these currencies. But of course, if you look overall, that there's no way to tell which one of these fake narratives is going to catch on, which one of them is going to have the marketing that's going to make it. And ultimately, you're just gambling on fraud. You're gambling on fraudulent, incorrect narratives that are being peddled in order to, as you said, avoid securities law or just benefit from the ability to print money.
Oh, just one point to add to that. Actually, I actually had one idea, because I used to, back in the day when I was learning about Bitcoin, I used to attend some workshops learning how to actually code on Ethereum. Actually, ironically enough, I actually learned how to make my own smart contracts and whatnot. And I actually wrote a white paper, my own white paper, to try and make my own little network. But when I wrote my white paper, I intrinsically didn't like the idea of this issuing tokens and minting tokens. I thought it was a stupid idea, because I liked the idea. I had already invested in the idea of Bitcoin, that you earn currencies through work. So I figured, let me make a system whereby that's exactly how it works. So the system I had was about reputation. So you have a shop, and you want to give out tokens that you can redeem. You know, you buy coffee every day, you get a token, and if you get 5 tokens, you get free coffee. That was just the idea. Imagine you can have this token and use it at other shops rather than just this one shop. So the question was, how do you get this token out there in the market? That was my because I didn't want to mint it because I thought that was unfair. What gives me the right to mint these tokens? So my idea was, everyone who goes to a shop and verifies that the shop is actually a real shop and actually has a real business and does a good review, they can be rewarded for their work. So I actually tried to incorporate the idea of proof of work into the token. So maybe if someone had a similar idea where they could reward someone for actual real world work and they can receive some kind of work for that, maybe, I don't know. I'm not saying that it's not, by the way, I'm not saying it's haram, these tokens. I'm just saying that it's just a scam. But if someone actually had a token whereby it was attached to something real world, like I said, some kind of real world function, like mining, for example, then maybe that could work. But again, why do something that is not tested when you can use something that's already tried and tested, which is, like I said, you use Satoshis. I mean, we've seen so many ecosystems grown now that you can reward people with Satoshis. It seems to work.
Yeah, no, but I think the answer to that one is, if you could attach anything in the real world to a token, as you were saying earlier with any kind of asset, if you could attach anything to a token, then you can also attach gold, and then we don't need Bitcoin and we don't need tokenization. We just go back to a gold standard and we have a digital gold standard.
Exactly,
but the entire problem is that you can't attach digital assets to real world asset. There's nothing to prevent you, as the person who controls this network, from making more assets than there is gold or real estate or whatever it is. So we're back to square one. We're back to having a centralized issuer. So you might as well just stick to fiat, because at least that's been tried and tested and it's got a banking system attached to it. And what you have is essentially just a one guy doing things, trusting in an entity.
Actually, it reminded me actually when you said that, I was actually approached. I was actually hired for a consultation from one of the representatives of the UK government about they was exploring the idea of tokenizing or putting the land registry on the blockchain. And we went through a whole 2 hours hashing out this idea, how would it work? And the conclusion was, it's not going to work. Because he gave me all these different scenarios how it could work. And I said, yeah, but you have the fundamental problem is, you've made an immutable ledger. What happens if someone comes to someone's house at gunpoint and convinces them to send that house to another person's wallet? And then you as the government wants to undo that because it's a crime. You can't do that. I mean, he still has the house. He still lives in the house. But now the whole system, what does the system mean then? You have a system which says this other guy is the owner, but we all know he isn't the owner. And you've made a system that is immutable. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
It makes no sense. Absolutely. No sense, and what if I hack your private keys? Do I get to go into your house and evict you from the house?
Exactly.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
So there's going to have to be an authority that overrules whatever the private key tells you and tells you, nope, that house is this guy's.
Yeah.
And so you're trusting that authority anyway. And so we're back to just the same thing. So all of these stories only make sense as excuses to print money. The more time you spend in the crypto universe, the more time you spend looking into shitcoins, the more you realize there's absolutely no reason to use anything other than Bitcoin, except you want to have a money printer for yourself. And this, a lot of people think, oh, you're not being open-minded. Oh, you're anti-innovation. And these people can continue to enjoy their delusions. There is no reason for needing another currency. There is no possibility of making any other currency that is truly decentralized. We've got all of these tens of thousands of currencies. It would take me 15 minutes of Googling for any single one of them to find you the list of names that you could lock up and put a gun to their head and have them change the protocol. Yeah. So the idea that you can make something decentralized like Bitcoin is fictitious. And so it's Bitcoin or fiat slavery. That's the only choice.
You know what's interesting about Bitcoin? I think, again, one of its properties about Bitcoin, like I said, Bitcoin is more than just the code. It's properties. And what's interesting about Bitcoin and fascinating to me really is that the technology that Satoshi, what did he really do? Did he do anything which is really new? No, he put together multiple ideas into this package called Bitcoin. And what's unique and amazing about this is that it only really works in that one system, Bitcoin. It's like, put it into any other system, it just doesn't seem to work. It only actually worked in that one-time solution of Bitcoin that it could have gone. I mean, it could have gone wrong. Maybe Satoshi made a mistake. Maybe he's still alive. So many things could have gone wrong, but so many things came together. So many pieces came together almost miraculously, and that's why I say you can't actually redo Bitcoin. The system can't be remade.
I think a good way of thinking of it is that it's like a jailbreak. You know, somebody figured out a plan to get out of the fiat jail, and that plan could only work once, because once you've done it and once you've escaped, they're going to figure out how you did it and they're going to close it. You know, you figured out he's going to dig a hole, or he's going to build a ladder or something and get out. And then once they figured out, once they've seen this guy break out, they're going to build something that's going to stop it. This is exactly where we are. So it could only be done once. After you've done it once, any person who's going to do it is doing it as a proprietary system, because it had to work as a neutral network, and it worked the first time as a neutral network. Now, if you wanted to do it as a proprietary system, then it doesn't work. And once you already have the neutral network out there functioning, you can't make another neutral network, because anybody who wants the neutral network is going to the already existing neutral network, and the only people that are going to be drawn to the proprietary networks are people who are in it for reasons other than a neutral network. And so you end up with essentially a security, somebody's liability.
And I think, I know many Muslims may object to what I'm going to say next, but if you think about it, if you look at the Islamic belief of qadr, whereby everything is pre-decreed and Allah has decreed things to be as it is. If you look at our current situation where we've been living in the last 50 years in a fiat world, in a world of riba, and then you have this system that if you actually analyze it, it shouldn't have happened. I mean, there was every reason for things to go the other way. Either Satoshi to still be alive and take control of the system, or there's so many things that could have gone wrong that it didn't go wrong, that this is literally like a gift to mankind to say, look, here's your opportunity to exit this interest-based credit system, and this is the only opportunity you have. I'm not saying that Satoshi is an angel or sent down from the heavens, but I am saying that unless someone can show me a feasible alternative to Bitcoin, Muslims have no alternative but to embrace this, because it's, like I said, it's either the pork or the beef. There is nothing else in the middle. So those who say, oh, but brother, how do you know it's this and that? Look, forget the argument. If you don't like Bitcoin, fine. I don't mind. You can hate it as much as you like. But unless you can be an alternative to fiat that also works, you have no argument. That's the only conclusion. Even if you want to say, oh, but brother, how do you know it's decentralized? Who is Satoshi Nakamoto? Bro, it's irrelevant. The issue is this. You don't like Bitcoin, fine. Don't like it. Hate it as much as you like. But we acknowledge and we agree that fiat is haram. What alternative do you actually have today that I can act upon now other than Bitcoin? Because if you don't have that, your argument is pointless. You're just arguing over semantics. You have Bitcoin and you have fiat, and there's nothing else. So you choose. That's what I've come to at the moment. When people argue, I get frustrated now. I'm like, okay, I can't be asked with the argument anymore, because unless you've brought me a solution, I don't see any alternative. Just wake up.
Exactly. I think this is the key thing, that it's not like we're offering you a new phone, or, you know, well, this is a faster iPhone, or this is a fancier Android. It's not just a new feature that's nice to have. If you care about your religious beliefs as a Muslim, and if you care about justice in the world in general, you don't even have to be a Muslim. If you don't like the idea of living in a world where a small, tiny percentage of humanity gets to siphon off the wealth of all the rest of humanity because they have access to the money printer, to the fiat debt printer, then this is your only way out. And the vast majority of people who have any kind of, I should say, you know, a bigger outlook on life beyond their day-to-day eating and surviving, the people who care about political or economic issues, the people who are upset about poverty or about inequality, the vast majority of those people, they're upset about things that are caused by inflation. They may not understand it. They may be brainwashed to believe moronic leftist ideas that this is all the result of capitalism and free trade or whatever. But the reality is, if you really understood what you're upset about, you would understand that the real issue is inflation. And so if you think that is a problem, your only way out is Bitcoin. Your only way out of this system is Bitcoin. So therefore, as a Muslim, as any person who cares about justice, who cares about humanity, who cares about not living in a world where you're enslaved and need to constantly work harder to provide for others to commit all kinds of horrible crimes, this is the only alternative. And so the onus is on you to prove why sticking to debt slavery with fiat is superior to this new technology. The onus is not on the people who have this new technology to show you why it has all these fancy bells and whistles that make it better than your debt slavery system, because the only working alternative to Bitcoin is fiat debt slavery.
And the funny thing is that just to I would say put the nail in the coffin, if he actually was to ignore inflation, and if he actually was to even ignore interest, ignore riba as an issue. Imagine there was no issue. The issue is not riba. The issue is not inflation. The issue is not the IMF and the Cantillon effect. None of that's the issue. The simple fact is, transacting using banks is inefficient way of doing business. I mean, let me give you an example. I mentioned to you just a half an hour ago. There was the guy who asked me to transfer to him money to hire his flat, his apartment, when I was doing Umrah. That was about almost 2 weeks ago. Would you believe me? I told you that his money hasn't arrived in his account yet? Why? Because the bank sent me a list of questions. Who is this person? How do you know him? What's the reason for your transactions? Where's the source of your money? And is there a third party involved? What's his name and address? What's his date of birth? I'm not joking. These are the questions they asked me. I replied to them almost 10 days ago. And to this moment today, the guy's messaging me, where's my money? I'm like, look, I sent it to you. It left my bank account. You asked your bank. I don't know where it is. And I thought like saying to him, if you just accepted Bitcoin, it would have been over. Just like I say, these are the things that every person, Muslim or non-Muslim, we recognize immediately. That the fact that the banks control your money and they KYC your money and they ultimately decide when and where you spend your money, this is enough reason to leave that system. That's enough reason. I mean, look at Russia. They had their money seized. That's enough reason to leave fiat, because someone else ultimately controls your income. It controls your wealth. That is one of the features that is undeniable, unarguable about comparing Bitcoin and fiat. With Bitcoin, I can send my money to you immediately, and not a single human being can stop that from going ahead. If I pay the fees and it's mined in a block, it's done and dusted. Whereas in the fiat system, I put your bank details in, I press send, and then after that I'm making dua. I'm praying, oh Allah, please let the money get there in time. Oh Allah, please don't let them stop it. Oh Allah, please don't let them close down my account because of some reason I don't understand. You have to, every transaction you're making dua. I'm not joking. I hate using the bank because every time I open the app, I have to make dua. Yeah. It's still functional. I've had accounts closed down, no explanation, just closed. So at the very least, ignore all the issues of fiat, of interest, and ignore issues of inflation. Fundamentally, it's a broken system. It's broken as a system.
No, I agree. All right, we have a question from Harry who asks, if the value of the dinar, dirham, or BTC increases over time, we would tend to hoard money itself. Could you comment on hoarding, nisab, and demurraj, please? Do you have thoughts on that?
So just to clarify, you mentioned some words here. They mentioned the word nisab. So for those who don't know, Muslims have in Muslim beliefs, in religion, we have something called zakat. Essentially, it's a money taken, 2.5% of your wealth that you've held and stored for a year over a certain limit. Once you have this threshold, and you had it for over a year, you pay 2.5% every year in zakat to 8 people or eight categories. One is poor, those who have debts, and the traveler, all that kind of stuff. So they receive your donation. But that's only if you have this threshold. And that threshold is about 81 grams of gold, which is about, I think now, $4,300. So if you have $4,000, you pay no zakat. If you have $3,000, you pay no zakat. If you have $5,000, and you held it for a year, you pay zakat. So that's the issue of nisab. Now, in terms of answering the question of what is, I think the question is related to the value of the nisab. Is that the question? So how would you pay your zakat if the value of it goes up and down? So one of the things I did a video on this a few years ago, and it was trying to answer the question about this nisab, this threshold. Was this threshold set as an act of worship, meaning it just do this number, once you reach this number, then you pay nisab, or was it an actual value? Meaning, it says in Islam, if you have 85 grams of gold, that is the threshold of what is a rich person. And therefore, if you are a rich person, you pay zakah. Less than that, you're not rich, and therefore you don't pay zakah. So the question is, what happens if the 85 grams of gold can now barely buy you a bottle of water because the price of gold has gone to zero? Do we still stick to that threshold or not? That's essentially, I think that's kind of what he's asking. And what I discovered, interestingly enough, was that it was attached to a value, not a number. Let me explain why. We have zakat is on gold, on silver, on camels, on sheep, on cows, some produce, and whatnot. So when you actually look at the number of camels you need to have, the number of sheep you need to have, the number of silver you need to have, the amount of gold you need to have, and what is that threshold? At the time of the Messenger of Allah, they actually were all the same value. Meaning, for 85 grams of gold, you could buy 5 camels. And for 5 camels, you could exchange for 40 sheep. And for 40 sheep, you can exchange for 200 dirham. I.e., they were all the same value. They were all actually the same value. So fast forward now to the 21st century. What do we do? Do we still stick to a value, or does it change? Ironically, gold, what you could buy for gold today, if you actually look at the text, the Islamic text, is actually the same you could buy for gold today, back in them. As in, if you actually look at how much 85 grams of gold could buy you today, it actually would buy the same amount of camels you could buy back then. So it actually hasn't changed, ironically. But silver, it has. So the only issue we have at the moment, Islamically speaking, is with the value of silver, not with gold. So the nisab of gold is the same, it hasn't changed. And the camels and sheep is still the same thing. You still do the same things you can do with a camel and sheep, and still have the same. But silver, it has changed. Back at the time of the Messenger of Allah, the ratio between gold and silver was 7 grams to 1 gram of gold. 7 grams of silver was equal to 1 gram of gold at the time of the Prophet Muhammad. Today, it's about 70 to 1. So it's actually drastically changed. If you was to pay zakah today, if you was to say, okay, how would I pay zakah in my fiat money? I would say use the value of gold as your nisab, as your threshold, because that has remained constant throughout the ages. But don't use the value of silver, because that has been decimated. So if you look at the nisab of gold, that's about $4,300. If you look at the nisab of silver, it's about $500. So technically speaking, if you go by the threshold of silver, you're considered rich if you just had $500, which we know is not the case. Whereas if you look at nisab of gold, $4,500 is the minimum threshold of that, and that actually adds up to be the same. So applying that now to Bitcoin, I would use the value of gold when weighing Bitcoin. And actually, ironically, if you're interested, I actually have a chart on TradingView. So I'll give you the details after that. But if you go on TradingView and you put in this ticker or whatever, it actually tracks the value of Bitcoin in gold, and you put in the details how much money you have in Bitcoin. It tells you if you're above the nisab or below the nisab throughout the ages. So you just look at when you had the nisab, what the age was, and it tells you if you have to pay zakat or not in TradingView. I mean, it's available if you want to use it. But yeah, so that's how you would pay your zakat in Islam, in gold, in Bitcoin, and even in fiat if you want to add that as well. You have to weigh it according to gold, purely because gold has maintained what it has. But don't use silver as your measure. Now, there is one slight caveat to this conclusion, what I just mentioned. If you actually have silver, so imagine you actually have the nisab of silver in silver, then I would say in that bar itself, give the zakat in that silver. Why? Because what I'm saying is an ijtihad. I'm looking at the evidence, I'm looking at the situation, and I'm evaluating that on balance of probability. If you look at what was said, it seems that there was a constant value. So we stick to that constant value. But when it comes to silver, just for the sake of the actual number being mentioned, in that piece of silver, pay your zakat in that silver. Not in all your overall wealth, but just in the actual silver bars you might have in your house, which I'm guessing 99.999% of people don't have 200 dirhams in their house. But if you did happen to have them,
Hopefully none of my listeners, after all of my tirades against silver, I really hope if you're listening, get rid of your silver as quickly as you can.
It's not. But on a side note, I know sometimes I go on a bit, but on a side note, there's one actual interesting argument I make towards Muslims who have an issue about the volatility of Bitcoin. They say, oh, how can you use Bitcoin? How can it be currency? It's so volatile. I say, okay, I concede Bitcoin is volatile. But you also concede that silver is currency, Islamically speaking. How volatile is silver? Can you feasibly use silver as a currency? If they say yes, they by definition have to accept Bitcoin because silver is as volatile as Bitcoin. During COVID, it went from $15 an ounce to $30 an ounce. That's almost doubling in a couple of months. That's Bitcoin territory right there. So if Muslims accept silver as a currency, by definition, they have to accept Bitcoin as currency, let me rephrase that. If they accept the volatility of silver, they have to also accept the volatility of Bitcoin because they're the same. And likewise, if they accept the volatility of the Turkish lira or the volatility of the Lebanese pound or whatever they call it, they also by definition have to accept the volatility of Bitcoin. So that's my own little caveat, my own little thing to add there about silver, is that by Islam, we have to accept silver as a currency. And therefore, if it's volatile in silver, then it's also volatile in Bitcoin, and it's fine.
Yeah, I think volatility is just people dealing with goods on the market. Price goes up and down. That's just how the prices work. I think you cannot establish a religious limit on how much volatility. There are no volatility indices anywhere in religious scripture, so it's inevitable.
There's actually the opposite. I would say there is, meaning we have a text, we have an event, a time message of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where the companions or his disciples, they came to him and said to him, "O Messenger of Allah, the prices have gone up. Can you set the prices for us?" And he said, "No, verily it is Allah who sets the prices." So that was the first thing. He explained that, number one, setting prices is not the remit of not only a leader, but not even a prophet can set prices. So for those who say that we can set prices, then maybe you're higher than a prophet, I don't know. But if the prophet can't set the prices and he receives revelation from the heavens, and the leader can't set prices, then what about us? That's the first thing. But then he continued. He didn't just stop there. He continued by saying, "I don't want to meet any of you on the day of judgment, and any of you have a claim of oppression against me." Meaning, if he sets the price, let's say bread is at £10, and he sets it at 5, and you transact at 5, oppression is happening. Because the guy who deserves 10 is not getting his 10. He's been oppressed, he's been madhloom, he's been oppressed from the remaining of his £5 that he deserves, because that's the market price. So by setting the prices, you are effectively oppressing the merchant, either up or down, whatever the case may be. So actually the Prophet Muhammad refused to set prices because he refused to oppress the people by doing so. So we actually have a precedent, Islamically speaking, that number one, volatility existed at the time of the Message of Allah. They actually had volatility. And number two, there was actually a need to address the volatility. They said set the prices because it's becoming expensive. But he refused to do so. So I can make a claim, Islamically speaking, that it's number one, volatility existed from the beginning. So you can't say it's a new thing. It's not a new phenomenon, it's an old phenomenon. And number two, he didn't try to fight volatility, he embraced it. You can say. So I'll probably say that there's actually maybe a case to be made that volatility is okay. Volatility is the market.
Yeah, no, I agree with you entirely. Muaawiyah, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having
This
me.
has been a very fascinating and useful conversation, and I hope it gives our listeners plenty of food for thought. Halal food for thought, obviously.
Thanks for having me. Halal food, alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair. Thanks for having me. It's a good opportunity to come here, and I'm glad to share the Islamic stance in regards to Bitcoin, because I think it's very important for Muslims to wake up. And I think you gave a perfect analogy. I mean, when you said it literally it was like a smack in the face. you get the analogy you said is that Bitcoin is not like an app or a new thing you have time to adopt. It's not like Twitter where you can afford to make your account a year later or a month later and it's just the same. The longer you take to realize it, the worse off it will become to you. I mean, imagine a world where everyone else on planet Earth adopts Bitcoin, except the Muslims. And then at that point we decide, okay, now it's halal because everyone's using it. Can you imagine what will be the case and how disadvantaged Muslims would be by default? As in, the thing we need to survive or escape interest is now adopted by everyone else, and we now have to pay that premium, whatever the price of Bitcoin is at the time. I mean, we're just harming ourselves by delaying. So hopefully Muslims will listen. At the very least, don't buy it on my behalf. Don't buy it because I said so, because Saifedean says so, but at least open a book and educate yourself. I mean, your religion deserves that you educate yourself and make the effort to escape riba.
All right, tell us more about where people can find you and what you do online.
At the moment, I mean, I have I made a few videos. Not a few. I tried to make it. I have a YouTube video account called BTC divided by zero, and essentially I have like almost 200 videos where I explain what Bitcoin is. I try to do so from first principles, from an Islamic perspective, bring in Islamic analogies, like for example, how Islam we have memorized the Quran through mutawatir. We try to give examples how you can understand Bitcoin from an Islamic perspective, even on a technical level. And more importantly, I've also have a series of videos in a respectful manner, addressing the objections by scholars of Bitcoin. I think that's probably one of my most important things I've developed. So I've gone through videos of those who object towards Bitcoin, scholars, and I've tried to address them one by one. So hopefully that will serve as a means for all of us to educate themselves and remove some of the doubts in their minds, because obviously people have doubts. So that's probably the first protocol. And obviously you can find me on Twitter as well. I do post often on Twitter.
What was your handle? Your Twitter handle?
Twitter handle is BTC divided by zero.
Okay.
Yeah, BTC divided by zero. It used
Excellent.
to be. Oh no, not Twitter.
And we'll be posting the links.
So not Twitter. Twitter I haven't because I wasn't sure. So everything else is that, but Twitter specifically it's C_hash review, because it used to be that old crypto hash review. I wasn't sure if I changed it, what I mean by my old post. I wasn't sure how that would work, so I left it as it is. But generally speaking, the name is that, but the actual handle is C_hash review.
Excellent. All right, we'll be posting all these links in the show notes. Thank you so much again, Muawiya.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll hopefully have you over again.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khairan.
Inshallah. Take care. Bye-bye.